Okay, today's video will be about tables and graphs. So a table. A data table is where you record information during an investigation. So you set your data table up before you start doing your investigation. That way, as you're going, you can write down your information. You don't want to create this afterwards because then you'll have to remember what you did, and that can be tricky. So you write down your information during your investigation. So you write down your measurements. Data tables are made up of columns, which go up and down, and rows, which go side to side. I remember this because the L in column is tall. It's tall and skinny, goes up and down. Where rows, all four letters in rows are very flat. So column goes up and down, and rows go side to side. With a data table, you make sure that you include a title to tell us what your table is about, and labels, so we know what your numbers or what your measurements mean. Okay, so I made this sample data table. We're going to look at stores that I went to in August. That's my title. Stores Ms. Kirshen went to in August. So that's a title that tells people what this table is about. I have my weeks here, so week 1, 2, 3, and 4. So my weeks are organized in columns because they're going up and down. And then I have my stores here: Target, OfficeMax, Whole Foods, and Quick Trip. These are 4 stores I go to quite often. So my stores are organized in rows, which go horizontally or side to side. So during week 1, I went to Target twice. I went to OfficeMax once. I didn't go to Whole Foods that week. I went to Quick Trip twice. So you would write that down during week 1. Week 2, I went to Target once. I went to OfficeMax once. I went to Whole Foods once. And I went to Quick Trip twice. During week 3, I went to Target once. I didn't go to OfficeMax. I didn't go to Whole Foods. I went to Quick Trip once. Because I was pretty busy that week. I didn't go shopping. And then week 4, I went to Target once. I went to OfficeMax once. I went to Whole Foods once. And I went to Quick Trip twice. So this is my data table. My data is organized in columns, so I can see how many times I went to each place in week 1. But it's also organized in rows, so I can see how many times I went to Target. So my totals here: I went to Target 5 times. I went to OfficeMax 3 times. I went to Whole Foods twice. And I went to Quick Trip 7 times, which sounds about right. I have to go get gas quite often. So this is my data table. My labels are store and week. So if I didn't put store here, I might not know what these places were. If someone wasn't familiar with Quick Trip, these aren't everywhere around the country, they may not know that these are stores. And definitely, if I didn't put week here, people would have no idea what these meant. This could be year, these could be months, but we put weeks here so that we know exactly what these numbers stand for. Okay, so after you make your data table, you're ready to make a graph. And graphs show data visually. So this shows your information in a picture form, kind of. It makes it easier for people to understand, for people who maybe don't understand numbers as well. In a data table, all you see is raw numbers or raw information, and your graph kind of breaks it down and puts it into a picture. We want to make sure that we display our information in multiple ways. We write it out in words, we use numbers in a table, and we put it into pictures in a graph. And we do that so that no matter who's reading our information, and regardless of what type of information they like to see, they're covered. They can either read it, they can see it in numbers, or they can see it in pictures. So that's really important. So graphs show your data visually. There are 3 main types that we're going to use. There may be some other types that aren't as common, though, and we're probably not going to use those. So you'll learn about those later. But a bar graph, probably familiar with these, they compare sets of data. So you use a bar graph when you're comparing something against another set. So if we were comparing what brand of bleach gets your clothes whitest, Clorox or Walmart brand, you would use a bar graph. A line graph shows how data changes over time. So if you're looking at something and you take measurements on it, week 1, week 2, week 3, etc., this would be a line graph. So you're going to show how this changes over time. And then lastly, a circle graph, or what I usually call a pie chart. That's what I was taught, was pie chart. You can also call it a circle graph. Shows parts of a whole or percentages. So if you're wanting to see what portion or what section of people, like a certain band, or, what type of pizza people like the most, you would use a circle graph to show the percentage. Okay, some tips when you're making graphs. First of all, Y goes to the sky. Let me show you what that means. Here, when you make a graph, you have what are called axes, A-X-I-S, an axis. You have an x-axis and a y-axis. And this is helpful so you know which information goes where. And Y goes to the sky. So the y-axis goes up because it goes to the sky, where the x-axis goes to the side. So Y goes to the sky. Next is dry mix, D-R-Y-M-I-X. This mnemonic helps you learn and remember what information goes in what spot on the graph. You may not believe this, but your information has to go in a certain spot. So dry stands for dependent, our dependent variable. Remember what's being measured as a result of the investigation, which is also sometimes called responding. Remember from our variables video that responding can also be the same word for dependent variable. So dependent or responding variable goes on the Y. So D-R-Y, dependent responding goes on the y-axis. So on this y-axis, that's where you're going to list your dependent variable. The manipulated independent, remember our independent variable, this is what we change on purpose to see the effect. Sometimes that's also called the manipulated variable. The manipulated independent variable goes on x. So this axis here, the x-axis, is where your independent variable is going to go. So dependent responding y and manipulated independent x. So when you're making your graph, you need to think, what is my independent axis? What is my independent variable? What is my dependent variable? And where do they go on my graph? And then lastly is tails. So dry mix is going to help you set up your graph so you know where stuff goes. Tails is going to make sure that you include all parts of the graph that's required. So T stands for title. You need to have a title at the top of your graph that tells us what it's about. Your axis is going to make sure that you have both axes and that you have the correct information on each one. Interval, that's on this side when you are numbering. What are you numbering by? Are you numbering by 2s or 5s or 1s? Labels, you need to tell me what is on each of these axes. I'll get to that in a moment. And then scale. How big or how wide are we making our graph? Does it fit our information? So when you're making your graph, you want to make sure that you remember dry mix. So line up your stuff, make sure it's on the right axis. And tails, to make sure you include all the parts. If you forget part or tails, you're going to get counted off because you're not having a complete graph. Okay. So we're going to make a couple of graphs. So this first one, we are going to look at the stores I went to in August. Okay? So we need to remember my axes. Which one is X and which one is Y? Y goes to the sky. So this one is my y-axis because it's going up. This one is my x-axis because it's going to the side. Got that. Now I need to know my dry mix. Dependent responding y. Dependent responding y, dry. And manipulated independent x, a dry mix. So what is my dependent variable? My dependent variable is the number of times I went to the store because that's the result. So this will be number of visits. Okay. And then what is my independent axis, or my independent variable? That's what I'm changing on purpose, and that would be the store. Cool. So the number of visits is my dependent variable because that's what changes. That's what is the result of the experiment. And then the store is my independent variable. That's what I am changing. That's what I'm looking at. Okay? So then we need to cover our tails. Cover your tails. So T is my title. I already have that. My A is my axis. So I have the correct axis, and I have the right information on the right axis. Next is the I, which is the interval. So we need to figure out what we're going to count by. L is my label. So I'm going to make sure that I include each of the stores here. So Target. We'll do OM for OfficeMax. It's a little long. WF for Whole Foods. And we'll do QT for Quick Trip. That's even what they're trying to say. The Target, OfficeMax, Whole Foods, and Quick Trip. So these are my labels. Okay? And then we also need to discuss our scale, which is the S. So title, axis, interval, labels, and scale. So my highest number of visits was 7. So it doesn't make any sense for this graph to go up to 100 because all of our numbers would be way down here. Okay? It does, however, make sense for our graph to maybe go up to 8 because you want to make sure you cover your biggest number and then 1. Okay? So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? So my scale is 8, and my interval is 1 because I'm counting by ones. Okay? Your scale needs to make sure that you hit all of your numbers. So my highest number was 7, so that's going to be covered, and then 1. Okay? Again, this scale doesn't need to go up to 100 because my biggest number is 7, and that doesn't really make any sense. My interval is 1 because I'm counting by ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay? It doesn't matter what you count by your interval as long as it's consistent. Okay? So what I would not want to see here is 1, 5, 9, 3, no. It has to be even, the same number on each line. So each one of these lines, I'm increasing by 1. I could have increased these by 2, or increased them by 5. It doesn't matter as long as it's consistent. You can't change what you're counting by halfway up the graph. Okay? So your interval needs to be even. So now we're going to make our bars. And we'll use some different colors here. So Target, I believe I visited 5 times. I make my bar. OfficeMax, I visited 3 times. Whole Foods, I visited twice, I believe. If I got this wrong, I'm sorry. I don't remember what I put. And then Quick Trip. I measured, I went to 7 times. So that's our bar graph. So again, dry mix, DRY, dependent responding Y. The number of visits is my dependent variable because it depends on which store it was. And my stores were my independent variable, MIX, manipulated independent x-axis. And then I covered my tails. Title, axis, interval, labels, and scale. So that's how you make a bar graph. Okay, we are also going to make a line graph. So we're going to look at the height of my rose bush by month. Okay, so first of all, we need to figure out our dry mix, our DRY MIX. So dependent responding Y, my dependent variable is the height of the rose bush. So height in meters. And make sure if it's a measurement, you include what unit you're using. Remember, if you don't include your unit, I assume you're talking about squirrels. So if you just put height, I'm going to assume that you're measuring your rose bush in squirrels. It's 5 squirrels tall, okay? Make sure you always include what measurement you're using. So that's my dependent variable, and then my manipulated independent x would be the month. That's what I'm changing. Okay? Month. So DRY, dependent responding y. My dependent variable is the responding variable, which goes on the y-axis. And my manipulated independent x, my independent variable, goes on the x-axis. Okay? So I measured this over the course of 5 months. We started in February. Okay. So there's my labels. And then I'm going to number the side. And the tallest my rose bush got was 3 meters. So this is going to be 3, the tallest, that's my scale. And I'm going to number these by 0.5 meters. Okay. So let's check and see if I covered my tail. So T, do I have a title? Yes, my title is right here. Make sure in your titles that you include your 2 variables. So your dependent variable and your independent variable should both be in your title. So title, T. A, do I have my axes correct? My y-axis has my dependent variable, and my x-axis has my independent variable. Check. I, what about my interval? My interval, just right here. My interval is 0.5 meters every time. So 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Interval is good. Labels. I have my months on each line, and I have my label, month and height in meters. So label is good. What about scale? Well, the scale of my graph goes up to 3 meters. The tallest my rosebush got was 3 meters. So there's no need for this graph to go any higher when my highest number is 3. Okay? So let's go ahead and plot our information. Now, when you have a line graph, you want to make sure that you're always putting your dots on the lines, okay? So see, like the 0.5 here, I didn't put it in between here on this space. The months and the heights always have to go on the lines. They don't go in the space in between. So here, I wouldn't put April in between these 2 lines. It has to be on the line. So on a line graph, make sure that you're always on the lines, okay? So in February, my rosebush was 0.5 meters tall. In March, grew quite a bit, it was 1.5. In April, it didn't grow at all, stayed 1.5. Don't know why that happened. In May, it grew to 2 meters. And then in June, it grew to 3 meters. So it started at 0.5, 1.5, 1.5, 2, and then 3, okay? Again, when we're plotting information on a line graph, you want to make sure that you do it at the intersection, okay? Now, if March had been, say, 0.7, and there is no 0.7 line, you would just graph it kind of halfway between 0.5 and 1.0, okay? So if there's not a line, you just kind of estimate and put it kind of where it makes sense, okay? But luckily for us, we had an exact line for 1.5 meters. Okay. So then, after you plot your points, you have to connect them with a line. So you always start at 0. You draw. You connect the dots. So here is our line graph for the height of my rose bush by month. Again, we'll check our tips. Dry mix, DRY. Dependent responding Y, the height is a dependent variable. Mix, manipulated independent X. The month is the independent variable, so it goes on the X. And then tails. Title, axis. I have the correct information on my axis. My interval is correct. I have labels. And then my scale is also correct. The height of my graph makes sense. So remember dry mix, and you always cover your tails to make sure that you have a complete, accurate, good to go graph.